Hey everyone, before we get into today's story, I need to say something. This one kept me up at night, and I don't say that lightly. I've covered dozens of cases on this channel, from military encounters to classified programs. But what I'm about to share with you today, it's different. This isn't about lights in the sky. This isn't about blurry footage or secondhand accounts. This is about what we found out there, and why you've never heard about it. Now, if you're new here, this channel is dedicated to uncovering stories that don't make it to the mainstream. Testimonies from researchers, military personnel, scientists, and insiders who've decided to break their silence. We don't do clickbait. We don't do speculation for the sake of views. Every story I bring to you has been carefully researched, cross-referenced when possible, and presented as close to the original account as I can get it. And this one? This one comes from a source who worked in a program most people don't even know existed. So here's what I'm asking. If you find value in this kind of content, if you think these stories deserve to be heard, take 2 seconds right now and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because the algorithm doesn't favor channels like this, and the only way we keep going is if you help spread the word. Drop a comment too. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you think after you hear this. I read every single one. Alright, let's. The story you're about to hear involves a discovery made by a small team working on a classified data analysis program. A discovery that, according to my source, changed everything they thought they knew about life beyond Earth. They found a planet, a twin to our own. And then they realized why humanity could never survive there. Let's start from the beginning. The night it happened, I almost called in sick. I had a headache, the kind that sits right behind your eyes and makes you want to lie down in a dark room. But I didn't. I drove to the facility, swiped my badge, sat down at my workstation, and logged into the system like I had done 1,000 times before. The room was quiet. It always was. Just the hum of servers, the glow of monitors, and the occasional sound of someone typing. There were maybe 6 of us working that night, each focused on our own data sets, our own little corner of the universe. I had a cup of cold coffee on my desk and a playlist running through my earbuds. I wasn't expecting anything. That's the thing about this job. You spend months looking at data that means nothing, waiting for something that might never come. You learn to expect disappointment. You learn to treat every anomaly as a probable error. So when the first reading came through, I didn't even react. I just stared at it for a moment, assumed the system had glitched, and reached for my coffee. But the reading didn't go away. I refreshed the screen. Still there. I ran a diagnostic on the software, thinking maybe there was a calibration issue with the data feed. Everything came back normal. The numbers on my screen weren't a glitch. They were real. And they were telling me something that made no sense. I remember leaning closer to the monitor, like somehow being 6 inches nearer would help me understand what I was looking at. The spectral analysis showed an atmospheric composition that was almost identical to Earth's. Not similar, identical. Nitrogen, oxygen, argon, carbon dioxide, all in the exact ratios we have here. That alone would have been remarkable. That alone would have been worth a paper. Maybe even a press release. But that wasn't what made my hands start to sweat. What made my hands sweat was the secondary reading, the one that showed traces of synthetic compounds, chemicals that don't occur naturally anywhere in the known universe, chemicals that only exist when someone makes them. I pulled up the source coordinates to make sure I was looking at the right target. I was KOI-7842.01. A planet we had flagged months ago as a potential candidate for further study, but nothing special. Just another rocky world in the habitable zone of a sun-like star, about 42 light-years from Earth. We had dozens of candidates like this in our database. Most of them turned out to be dead. No atmosphere, no water, no signs of anything interesting. I had personally reviewed the preliminary data on KOI 784201 weeks earlier and marked it as low priority. Nothing about it had stood out. But now, looking at these new readings, I realized that something had changed. Either our earlier analysis had been wrong, or the planet itself was different somehow. Neither explanation made sense. I ran the numbers again, same result. I ran them a third time, using a different algorithm, same result. My headache was gone now. I couldn't feel anything except my heart pounding in my chest and a strange tingling sensation in my fingers. I should have called my supervisor immediately. That was protocol. Anything anomalous gets flagged and escalated within the hour. But I didn't call him. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed to rule out every possible error before I put my name on something this significant. Because if I was wrong, if this turned out to be a sensor malfunction or a data corruption issue, my credibility would be destroyed. You don't cry wolf in this field. Not ever. So I spent the next 45 minutes going through every system check I could think of. I verified the telescope calibration logs. I cross-referenced the spectral data with archived readings from other instruments. I even checked the weather conditions at the ground stations that had relayed the data, looking for any atmospheric interference that might have corrupted the signal. Everything checked out. Everything was clean. The data was solid, and the data was telling me that somewhere out there, 42 light-years away, there was a planet with an atmosphere that shouldn't exist. An atmosphere that looked engineered. I finally called David. That was my supervisor, David Ehrlich. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me because it was almost 2 in the morning. His voice was groggy, irritated. I told him I needed him to come to the facility right away. He asked if it could wait until morning. I said no. I said I had found something and I needed him to see it before I trusted my own eyes. There was a long pause on the line. David had been doing this work for over 20 years. He had seen analysts get excited over false positives more times than he could count. I could hear the skepticism in his breathing, but something in my voice must have convinced him, because after a moment he just said, "I'll be there in 30 minutes," and hung up. I sat there in the dark, staring at my screen, waiting. The numbers hadn't changed. The impossible was still staring back at me. And for the first time in my career, I felt genuinely afraid. Not excited. Not curious. Afraid. Because I was starting to realize that what I had found might be bigger than anything I was prepared to handle. David arrived at 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I kept looking at the clock, counting the minutes, wondering if the data would somehow correct itself before he got there. It didn't. He walked in with his coat still on, coffee in hand, looking like he had aged 5 years since I last saw him. He didn't say anything to me. He just walked straight to my workstation and leaned over my shoulder to look at the screen. I watched his face as he processed what he was seeing. First confusion, then concentration, then something I had never seen on David's face before, fear. He set his coffee down slowly, like he had forgotten he was holding it. He asked me how long ago I had found this. I told him about 2 hours. He asked me if I had told anyone else. I said no. He nodded, still staring at the screen, and then he pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he said. He walked to the other side of the room and spoke in a low voice. But when he came back, his expression had changed. The fear was still there, but now there was something else. Resignation, like he knew what was coming next and there was nothing he could do to stop it. 20 minutes later, 4 men I had never seen before walked into our facility. They weren't wearing uniforms, but everything about them, the way they moved, the way they spoke, the way they looked at us, screamed government, military, intelligence, something with authority that went far beyond our little research team. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't explain who they were or how they had gotten there so fast. They just told us to step away from our workstations and follow them to a conference room on the other side of the building. A conference room I didn't even know existed. As I walked down that hallway, flanked by men who wouldn't meet my eyes, I kept thinking about how I had almost called in sick that night, how close I had come to missing this moment. And I wondered, for the first time, if missing it would have been better. If some discoveries are meant to stay buried, if some truths are too dangerous to know. That moment right there, that's when Dr. Nathan Cole's life split into 2 parts, before and after. Before, he was just another data analyst working on a classified program, going through the motions, expecting nothing. After, He was someone who had seen something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Those men who walked into the facility that night, he never saw them again after that week. The data he discovered? It was transferred to a system he no longer had access to. But what happened in that conference room over the next several hours changed everything he thought he understood about our place in the universe. And what they found when they dug deeper into that planet, the one they started calling Echo, that's where this story truly begins. Because the atmospheric anomaly was just the surface. What was hiding underneath the data was something far more disturbing. Something that explains why this discovery was buried, and why humanity was never meant to know about it. I should probably tell you how I ended up in that room in the first place. It's not like I grew up dreaming of working on classified government programs. I was just a kid from Wisconsin who happened to be good at math. Really good. The kind of good that gets you scholarships and attention from professors who see something in you that you don't even see in yourself. I went to MIT on a full ride, studied applied mathematics with a focus on statistical analysis and signal processing. I wasn't interested in space back then. I was interested in patterns, in finding order within chaos, in taking massive amounts of random-looking data and extracting meaning from it. That's what I was trained to do. That's what I spent 6 years of my life perfecting. When I graduated, I had offers from tech companies, hedge funds, research institutions. I could have gone anywhere. But then I got a call from a recruiter who worked for a company I had never heard of. A company that didn't seem to exist when I searched for it online. And he offered me something that none of the others could, a chance to work on something that actually mattered. The company was called Meridian Analytics. At least, that's what it said on my employment contract and my tax forms. I've since learned that it was a shell company, one of dozens used by various government agencies to hire civilian contractors for classified work without drawing attention. I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was that they were offering me 3 times the salary I would have made anywhere else, full benefits, and a job that came with a security clearance I had to spend 4 months obtaining. The vetting process was intense. Background checks, polygraphs, interviews with people who never told me their names or what agency they worked for. They talked to my parents, my college roommates, my high school girlfriend. They wanted to know everything about me, and I mean everything. Where I traveled, what I believed, who I associated with, what websites I visited. By the time they were done, I felt like I had been turned inside out and examined under a microscope. But I passed, and in the fall of 2014, I reported to a facility in Northern Virginia that didn't appear on any map. The work itself was not what I expected. I had imagined something dramatic, secret meetings, classified briefings, maybe even some James Bond-style intrigue. The reality was far more mundane. I sat in a windowless room with 5 other analysts, staring at computer screens for 10 hours a day, processing data that came to us through encrypted channels. We were told the data originated from various astronomical observation programs, but we were never given specifics. I didn't know which telescopes were collecting it, or where they were located, or who was operating them. That information was above my clearance level. My job was simple. Take the raw spectral data, run it through our analysis protocols, flag anything that met certain criteria, and pass it up the chain. That was it. I was a filter. A very well-paid, highly vetted filter. Most days, I flagged nothing. The data was endless. Thousands of star systems, millions of individual readings, and almost all of it was unremarkable. Just noise. Just the universe being its vast, empty, indifferent self. The other analysts on my team were similar to me. Mathematicians, physicists, computer scientists. Smart people who had been recruited out of top universities and offered jobs they couldn't refuse. We weren't allowed to discuss our work outside the facility, and we were discouraged from discussing it too much even among ourselves. Each of us had our own data sets, our own targets, our own little piece of the puzzle. I never knew what the full picture looked like. I don't think any of us did. We just did our jobs, collected our paychecks, and went home to lives that felt increasingly disconnected from the secret world we inhabited 9 to 5. I had a girlfriend at the time, Sarah. She thought I worked for a defense contractor doing statistical analysis for logistics optimization. That's what I told her. That's what I told everyone. The lie came easily after a while. It became a reflex. And the longer I worked there, the more I realized that the lie wasn't just about protecting classified information. It was about protecting myself. Because the truth was, I didn't fully understand what I was doing. I was looking for something, but I didn't know what it was. The first year was the hardest, not because the work was difficult. It wasn't. The algorithms did most of the heavy lifting. What was hard was the boredom. The relentless, soul-crushing boredom of sifting through data that never revealed anything interesting. I started to wonder if the whole program was a waste of money. Some government boondoggle that existed to justify someone's budget. I mentioned this to David once during one of our weekly check-ins. He just smiled and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence." We're looking for a needle in a haystack the size of the observable universe. The fact that we haven't found it yet doesn't mean it's not there. I nodded like I understood, but privately I thought he was just trying to keep morale up. I didn't believe we would ever find anything. I thought I would spend 5 years in that windowless room, padding my resume and my savings account, and then move on to something more fulfilling. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. By the time 2016 rolled around, I had settled into a routine. I arrived at the facility at 8, left at 6, spent my evenings with Sarah or at the gym, and tried not to think too much about the work. It had become automatic, mechanical. I could run the analysis protocols in my sleep. My brain had learned to recognize the patterns of meaninglessness, the data signatures that indicated nothing special, just another dead rock orbiting another unremarkable star. I had reviewed thousands of exoplanet candidates by then. Gas giants, ice worlds, scorched planets too close to their stars, frozen planets too far away. The occasional rocky world in the habitable zone that got everyone excited for a few days before the follow-up analysis revealed some disqualifying factor. No atmosphere. Wrong chemical composition. Unstable orbit. There was always something. The universe seemed determined to disappoint us, and I had made peace with that disappointment. I had accepted that my job was to confirm over and over again that we were alone. That Earth was a fluke, a cosmic accident that would never be repeated. And then I found Echo. I want to be clear about something. I'm not a whistleblower. I'm not trying to expose anyone or bring down any institution. I'm not angry at the government or the program or the people I worked with. Most of them were good people doing what they believed was important work. What I am is tired. Tired of carrying this weight alone. Tired of knowing something that changes everything and not being able to tell anyone. For years, I convinced myself that the secrecy was necessary, that the public wasn't ready, that there were good reasons for keeping this buried. But the older I get, the less I believe that. The more I think that people deserve to know what's out there, what we found, what it means. I'm not looking for fame or money or vindication. I'm looking for relief. I'm looking to finally say out loud what I've been whispering to myself in the dark for almost a decade. We found something. Something real. Something that proves we're not alone in the universe. And something that terrified the people who saw it so much that they made it disappear. Now I want to pause here for a second. This is important. Nathan Cole wasn't a whistleblower looking for attention. He wasn't some disgruntled employee trying to get revenge on his former bosses. He was a data guy, someone who spent years staring at numbers, not stars. Someone who was trained to be skeptical, to question everything, to never accept a conclusion without rigorous evidence. That's what makes what happens next so significant. Because when someone like Nathan tells you he found something that defied explanation, you have to take it seriously. He didn't want to believe it. He fought against believing it. He ran every test he could think of to prove himself wrong. But the data didn't lie. And what the data revealed about that planet, about Echo, was something that would challenge everything we think we know about life, civilization, and the fate that might be waiting for us among the stars. The first thing that caught my attention wasn't the atmospheric data. It was the size. KOI 7842. O1 had a radius of 1.03 Earth radii and an estimated mass of 1.07 Earth masses. To put that in perspective, most of the rocky planets we find in habitable zones are either too small, meaning they can't hold an atmosphere, or too large, which usually means they're mini Neptunes with crushing surface pressures and no solid ground. Finding a planet this close to Earth's dimensions was already unusual. But when I pulled up the orbital parameters, my pulse started to quicken. The planet orbited its star at a distance of 0.98 astronomical units with an orbital period of 361 days. Its star was a G-type main sequence, slightly older than our Sun but nearly identical in luminosity and temperature. The numbers were so close to Earth's that I actually laughed out loud. I thought it was a calibration error. I thought someone had accidentally loaded our own planet's data into the system as a test file. I checked the source coordinates 3 times before I accepted that I was looking at something real. The atmospheric analysis came next, and that's when I stopped laughing. The spectrographic data showed a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere with concentrations almost identical to Earth's 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, with trace amounts of argon, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. That alone would have been extraordinary. We had never found another planet with a breathable atmosphere, not once in all the years of searching. But the data kept coming, and each new reading was more impossible than the last. The isotopic ratios of the atmospheric gases matched Earth's to within measurement error. The absorption bands indicated the presence of ozone, which meant there was likely active photochemistry happening in the upper atmosphere. And then I saw the water vapor signatures. Not just traces, significant concentrations, enough to suggest oceans, liquid water on the surface. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a habitable planet. This was a planet that looked like it could already be inhabited. I called David over. My voice must have sounded strange because he came immediately, without asking why. He stood behind me and read the data in silence for what felt like 10 minutes. Neither of us spoke. When he finally said something, it was just one word, again. So I ran the analysis again. Same results. He told me to use a different algorithm, an older one that we kept as a backup for cross-validation. I ran it. Same results. He pulled up a chair and sat down next to me, and together we went through every single parameter, looking for the flaw, the error, the explanation that would make this make sense. We didn't find one. The data was clean. The instruments were functioning properly. The source was verified. We were looking at a planet that, by every measurable standard, was a twin of Earth, and neither of us knew what to do with that information. David just kept shaking his head, muttering "this can't be right" over and over, like a prayer he was hoping someone would answer. The first sign that something was wrong came from Jennifer. She had been running deeper analysis on the atmospheric data, looking for trace gases that might tell us more about Echo's geology and biology. Standard procedure. On Earth, you can learn a lot about a planet's internal processes by studying what's floating in its air. Volcanic activity releases sulfur compounds, biological processes produce methane, ocean chemistry affects carbon dioxide levels. Jennifer was methodical, careful, the kind of scientist who triple checks everything before she says a word. So when she called us over to her workstation with that look on her face, the look that said something doesn't add up, we all stopped what we were doing immediately. She pointed at her screen, at a graph showing the concentration of various trace gases in Echo's atmosphere. "Look at this," she said. "Look at these ratios." I looked. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. The numbers seemed fine, normal, even. And then it hit me. They weren't just normal. They were exactly normal. Exactly like Earth's. You have to understand why that's a problem. Planetary atmospheres are like fingerprints. They're shaped by billions of years of unique geological and biological history. Even if two planets started with identical conditions, they would evolve differently over time. Random variations, different volcanic events, different patterns of life emerging in different orders. The chances of two planets having atmospheres that matched to the precision we were seeing were essentially zero. Not unlikely, zero. It would be like finding two people on opposite sides of the world with identical fingerprints, identical DNA, and identical life histories. Jennifer had run the numbers 3 times. The nitrogen to oxygen ratio matched Earth's to 4 decimal places. The concentration of argon was within 0.002% of our atmosphere. Even the isotopic ratios, the proportions of different atomic variations of each element, were nearly identical. This wasn't convergent evolution. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else entirely. Something that made my stomach tighten into a knot that wouldn't go away for weeks. David told us to keep digging. He wanted explanations, not speculation. So we dug. We analyzed every trace gas we could detect, looking for anything that might explain the impossible similarity. And that's when we found the CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. On Earth, CFCs don't exist naturally. They're entirely synthetic, invented in the 1920s for use in refrigerants and aerosols. We stopped producing most of them decades ago because they were destroying our ozone layer. But here they were, showing up in Echo's atmosphere at concentrations similar to what Earth had in the 1980s. I remember staring at that data point, my mind refusing to process it. CFCs meant industry. CFCs meant technology. CFCs meant that something on that planet had developed chemistry advanced enough to synthesize compounds that don't occur in nature. I looked at David. He was pale. His hands were gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles had turned white. Nobody said anything for a long time. We all understood what we were looking at. We just couldn't bring ourselves to say it out loud. The methane was the next piece of the puzzle. Methane is tricky because it can come from both biological and geological sources. Swamps produce it. Volcanoes produce it. Even certain types of rock formations can release it. But the methane in Echo's atmosphere had a pattern, a cycle. Concentrations rose and fell in a regular rhythm that corresponded roughly to the planet's orbital period. At first, we thought it might be seasonal. Maybe there was some kind of vegetation that produced methane during certain parts of the year, like rice paddies do on Earth. But the pattern was too precise, too regular. Natural systems are messy. They fluctuate. They respond to random variations in weather and temperature and dozens of other factors. This pattern looked engineered, like something was producing methane on a schedule, increasing output at specific intervals, and then reducing it again. Jennifer suggested it might be agriculture, industrial-scale farming with some kind of methane-producing crop. David told her that was insane. She told him to look at the data and come up with a better explanation. He couldn't. The team started to fracture after that. We had been working together for years, trusting each other, relying on each other's judgment. But this discovery, this impossible, terrifying discovery, was too much. People started taking sides. There were those who wanted to report everything immediately, to escalate to whatever agency was really running this program and let them decide what to do. And there were those who wanted to wait, to gather more data, to make absolutely certain we weren't making fools of ourselves before we claimed to have found evidence of extraterrestrial civilization. I understood both positions. The cautious part of me knew that if we were wrong, if there was some natural explanation we had overlooked, our careers would be over. We would be the team that cried alien. Nobody would ever take us seriously again. But the other part of me, the part that had spent years searching for exactly this kind of discovery, knew that we couldn't sit on this. If we were right, every day we delayed was a day the world spent not knowing the truth. I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie in bed next to Sarah, staring at the ceiling, running through the data in my head over and over again, looking for the flaw, the mistake, the explanation that would make everything normal again, but I couldn't find it. The data was clean. The analysis was sound. Every test we ran came back with the same conclusion. Echo's atmosphere showed clear signs of technological activity, not just life, not just intelligence, industry, manufacturing. A civilization that had developed far enough to alter the chemical composition of their entire planet, just like we had done to Earth. I started to wonder what they were like. Were they similar to us? Did they have cities, governments, art, music? Did they look up at the night sky and wonder if they were alone? Did they ever imagine that somewhere out there, 42 light years away, a team of analysts in a windowless room was studying their world, piecing together their existence from the faint chemical signatures in their atmosphere? It was a strange feeling, knowing that much about something and yet knowing nothing at all. The argument came to a head 3 weeks after Jennifer found the CFCs. We were all exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, barely holding ourselves together. David called a meeting and asked everyone to state their position. One by one, we went around the room. Report now. Wait for more data. Report now. Wait. The vote was split almost exactly down the middle. David listened to everyone, nodding slowly, and then he made the decision for us. He said we would continue analyzing for another 2 weeks. If we found anything that contradicted our conclusions, we would reassess. If we didn't, we would escalate. 2 more weeks. It seemed reasonable at the time. A compromise between caution and urgency. We didn't know that in 2 weeks, we would find something that made the CFCs and the methane cycles look like minor footnotes. Something that would make us wish we had never found Echo at all. I need you to pay close attention from this point on, because this is where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. Up until now, you could almost convince yourself this was just an incredible scientific discovery. A planet with life. Maybe even complex life, something to celebrate, to marvel at, to study for generations. But what Nathan and his team were about to uncover wasn't a cause for celebration. They weren't just looking at signs of life anymore. They were looking at signs of something that lived, built, and possibly thought, just like us. And that realization that somewhere in the cosmos, another civilization had risen, had developed technology, had changed their world the same way we've changed ours. That should have been the greatest moment in human history. But it wasn't, because the next thing they found would reveal what happened to that civilization, and it would force them to confront a question that nobody was prepared to answer. It was Michael Owen who noticed it first. He was our youngest analyst, fresh out of Caltech, brilliant but quiet, the kind of person who would sit in the corner during meetings, saying nothing, and then send you an email at midnight with an observation that changed everything. Michael had been running longitudinal analysis on the atmospheric data, comparing readings taken at different points over the past several months to see if anything was changing. Most of us had assumed the data would be static. We were looking at a snapshot, a single moment frozen in time by the speed of light. But Michael found something we had all missed. The CFC concentrations weren't stable. They were declining. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely declining. He showed us the graph, and at first I thought it was measurement error, instrument drift, something in our systems causing a false trend. But Michael had already accounted for that. He had corrected for every possible source of error. The decline was real, and it meant something that none of us wanted to accept. CFCs are remarkably stable molecules. On Earth, they can persist in the atmosphere for decades, even centuries. That's why they were such a problem for our ozone layer. Once they're up there, they stay up there, slowly breaking down and releasing chlorine atoms that destroy ozone molecules one by one. The only way CFC concentrations decline is if the source stops producing them and you wait long enough for natural processes to break them down. On Earth, we saw this effect after the Montreal Protocol banned most CFC production in the late 1980s. Concentrations peaked and then began a slow, gradual decline that's still continuing today. What Michael had found was the same pattern. Echo's CFC levels were dropping at a rate consistent with production having stopped somewhere between 800 and 1200 years ago. I remember doing the math in my head, trying to make sense of the timeline. Echo was 42 light years away. The light we were seeing had left that planet 42 years ago, which meant the CFCs we were detecting had been released into the atmosphere somewhere between 850 and 1250. Years before that, over a millennium ago. A civilization had been manufacturing industrial chemicals on that planet over 1,000 years ago, and then they stopped. We went back through all our data with fresh eyes, looking for other signs of decay. We found them everywhere. The methane cycles that had seemed so precise and regular, when we looked more closely, we could see they were degrading. The peaks were getting smaller, the valleys less defined. Whatever system had been producing that methane on a schedule was winding down, running out of fuel, falling apart. The vegetation signatures were still strong. The red edge was clearly visible, but even there, Michael found subtle signs of change. Certain wavelengths showed slight shifts that could indicate ecosystem stress. Species dying off, the biosphere slowly simplifying. It was like looking at a photograph of a house and realizing it wasn't a home anymore. The lights were still on, but nobody was living there. The garden was still growing, but nobody was tending it. Everything we were seeing was the aftermath of something, the echo of an echo fading into silence. David called another meeting. This one felt different from the others. There was no argument, no debate about what to do next. Everyone understood what the data was telling us. We had found a civilization, a real technological, planet-altering civilization, and we had found it too late. They were gone. Whatever had produced those CFCs, whatever had regulated that methane output with such mechanical precision, whatever intelligence had looked up at their sky and built and dreamed and wondered, it wasn't there anymore. The timeline suggested they had disappeared roughly 1,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries, a millennium. In cosmic terms, that's nothing. A blink of an eye. We had missed them by the smallest margin imaginable. If our species had developed this technology 1,000 years earlier, we might have seen them at their peak. We might have detected their radio signals, their city lights, their satellite networks. Instead, we were archaeologists sifting through ruins, trying to piece together a story that had already ended. I went outside that night. The facility had a small courtyard, nothing special, just a concrete square with a few benches and some half-dead plants. But you could see the sky from there. I sat on one of the benches and looked up at the stars, trying to find the patch of darkness where Echo's star would be. I couldn't, of course. It was too faint to see with the naked eye, just another point of light among billions, but I knew it was there. I knew that somewhere in that vast expanse, there was a planet that had once been like ours, a planet where something had evolved, had thought, had built, had wondered, and now it was empty, silent, dead. I tried to imagine what it must have been like for them at the end. Did they know what was coming? Did they fight against it? Did they have time to say goodbye? Or did it happen so fast that one day they were there and the next day they simply weren't? I sat there for hours, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling smaller and more alone than I had ever felt in my life. When I went back inside, Jennifer was still at her workstation. She hadn't moved in hours. I walked up behind her and saw what she was looking at, a composite image of Echo reconstructed from our spectral data. It wasn't a photograph, not really, more like an artist's impression based on scientific measurements, but it looked real. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling across the surface. Beautiful, perfect, and completely, utterly lifeless. I asked her if she was okay. She didn't turn around. She just said, "We're looking at a grave, Nathan. That's what this is. We spent all this time searching for life, and what we found is death. The biggest grave in history." I didn't know what to say. She was right. That's exactly what we had found. A world that had everything: water, atmosphere, vegetation. A civilization advanced enough to change the chemistry of their planet, and now had nothing. Just the slowly fading signatures of something that used to be there, dissolving into the background radiation of the universe like a message written in sand, waiting to be erased by the tide. The worst part wasn't knowing they were gone. The worst part was not knowing why. We had evidence of a thriving civilization, and then we had evidence of decline, and in between there was nothing. No explanation, no record, no final transmission saying, "This is what happened to us." Just silence. The CFCs stopped being produced. The methane cycles began to decay. The civilization vanished. and we were left staring at the aftermath, trying to read a story in a language we didn't speak, written by authors who had been dead for 1,000 years. I started to obsess over the question, what killed them? What could possibly wipe out an entire planetary civilization so completely that nothing was left but fading chemical traces? War? Disease? Environmental collapse? Something from space? An asteroid? A gamma-ray burst? Some cosmic catastrophe we hadn't detected? Every explanation I came up with felt inadequate, incomplete, like I was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. And then David came to us with the results of his analysis. The analysis that would finally answer our question. The answer that would keep me awake for years to come. We spent the next week running through every possible explanation. David divided us into teams, each one assigned to investigate a different hypothesis. Jennifer and I were tasked with looking at environmental collapse, the possibility that the civilization had destroyed itself through pollution, resource depletion, or runaway climate change. It was the most obvious explanation, especially given the CFCs we had detected. Maybe they had done what we're doing to Earth, only faster and more completely. Maybe they had poisoned their atmosphere, acidified their oceans, triggered a cascade of extinctions that eventually took them down with everything else. We built models, ran simulations, tried to reconstruct what a civilizational collapse might look like in the atmospheric data. But the numbers didn't fit. The biosphere was still there. Damaged, maybe. Simplified, possibly. But not destroyed. Whatever had killed the civilization hadn't killed the planet. The vegetation was still growing. The oceans were still full of water. If environmental collapse had been the cause, we would expect to see far more devastation than we did. Michael's team looked at war, nuclear war specifically. It was a grim possibility, but one we had to consider. A civilization advanced enough to produce CFCs was almost certainly advanced enough to split the atom. Maybe they had done what we've spent 70 years trying to avoid, push the button, launch the missiles, turn their cities into glass and their atmosphere into poison. We searched for the signatures of nuclear conflict, unusual isotope ratios that might indicate widespread fission or fusion events, elevated radiation levels, evidence of nuclear winter in the climate data. We found nothing, no smoking gun, no telltale signs of atomic devastation. That didn't rule it out entirely. A nuclear war 1,000 years ago might not leave detectable traces at this distance, but it made the hypothesis less likely. Besides, nuclear war might kill a civilization, but it usually doesn't kill everyone. There would be survivors. Pockets of population that rebuilt, that recovered, that started producing industrial chemicals again. We saw no evidence of that. The decline in the data was smooth and continuous. Whatever had happened, it had been thorough, complete, final. David's team investigated external threats, asteroid impacts, nearby supernova events, gamma-ray bursts from distant neutron stars. The universe is full of things that can kill a planet without warning. Cosmic disasters that strike with no regard for intelligence or achievement or hope. We had detected asteroids in ecosystem during our initial survey. Every solar system has them, so it was possible that one had slipped through, hit the planet, triggered an extinction event, but again, the evidence didn't support it. An asteroid large enough to wipe out a civilization would leave marks in the atmosphere. Dust, debris, elevated levels of certain elements like iridium. We looked for those markers and found nothing. Gamma-ray bursts were harder to rule out, but they typically cause very specific kinds of damage. Ozone depletion, increased UV radiation, genetic mutations, and we didn't see the signatures we would expect. Whatever had killed the civilization on Echo, it wasn't a random cosmic accident. It wasn't bad luck. It was something else, something we hadn't considered yet. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. One of our support staff, a technician named Rodriguez who maintained our data systems, had been running some background analysis on Echo's host star. It wasn't his job. He was supposed to be updating our servers, but he had gotten curious about the stellar data and started poking around on his own time. He came to David one morning with a printout, looking nervous, like he wasn't sure if he was about to be congratulated or fired. The printout showed a graph of the star's activity over time, reconstructed from various proxy measurements in our database. Most stars have activity cycles. Our Sun has an 11-year cycle of sunspots and solar flares, but Echo's star had something else, something we had missed because we weren't looking for it. Underneath the normal short-term cycles, there was a much longer pattern, a slow, gradual buildup of energy that peaked approximately every 12,000 years. And when it peaked, according to Rodriguez's analysis, it released a massive burst of radiation, not a flare, not a coronal mass ejection, something bigger, something that would bathe the entire inner solar system in enough high-energy particles to strip away ozone layers and irradiate anything living on the surface. I didn't believe it at first. The idea seemed too convenient, too much like science fiction. A star with a built-in kill switch that goes off every 12 millennia? But David took Rodriguez seriously. He had us verify the analysis from every angle we could think of, and every time, the numbers held up. Echo's star had a long-period activity cycle that we had never documented before, possibly because it was so rare and so slow that it hadn't been captured in any of our standard surveys. The mechanism was unclear. Rodriguez speculated it might involve magnetic field reconnection events deep in the stellar interior, but the pattern was unmistakable. Roughly every 12,000 years, the star underwent a paroxysm of activity that lasted anywhere from a few months to a few years. During that time, radiation levels in the habitable zone would spike by several orders of magnitude, enough to penetrate atmospheres, enough to damage DNA, enough to sterilize the surface of any planet unlucky enough to be in the way. Echo had been hit by this cycle roughly 1,000 years ago, and everything we had found, the declining CFCs, the decaying methane cycles, the fading biosignatures, suddenly made terrible sense. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what we found when we went back through the atmospheric data looking for signs of preparation. Because there were signs. Subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for them, but definitely there. The ozone layer on Echo was thicker than it should have been. Not by much, but enough to suggest artificial enhancement. There were traces of compounds in the upper atmosphere that didn't match any natural process we could identify. Compounds that might have been designed to reflect or absorb certain wavelengths of radiation. And there were anomalies in the orbital data, tiny perturbations that suggested something had once been in orbit around Echo. Something large. Something that wasn't there anymore. We couldn't prove it, but the implication was clear. They knew. The civilization on Echo had known about the cycle. They had seen it coming, probably centuries in advance. They had tried to prepare. They had enhanced their atmosphere, built structures in space, done everything they could think of to protect themselves from the coming storm, and it hadn't worked. The radiation had come anyway. The structures had failed or been destroyed. The enhanced atmosphere hadn't been enough. And 1,000 years ago, give or take, every intelligent being on that planet had died. I calculated the cycle. I had to. Once I understood what we were looking at, I could not know when the next event would occur. I went through Rodriguez's data, extrapolated the pattern forward, and came up with a number. The next radiation peak would happen in approximately 11,000 years. That might sound like a long time. It might sound like something so far in the future that it doesn't matter. But here's what kept me awake at night. We had been a technological civilization for maybe 200 years. 200 years out of the 4 billion years life had existed on Earth. The civilization on Echo had been around long. Enough to develop industrial chemistry, to build orbital structures, to figure out the cycle and try to stop it. That takes time. Centuries at least. Maybe millennia. And they had still failed. They had done everything right, and it hadn't been enough. If something like that existed in our solar system, if our sun had a hidden cycle we hadn't discovered yet, would we be able to stop it? Would we have enough time? Would all our technology and all our knowledge and all our desperate hope be enough to save us? Or would we end up like them, leaving nothing behind but fading chemical traces for some other civilization to puzzle over 1,000 years from now? Now here's what really disturbed me when I heard this. They didn't just die randomly. This wasn't a freak accident, a 1 in a billion cosmic event that nobody could have predicted. They saw it coming. They watched it approach for years, maybe decades, maybe centuries. They understood exactly what was going to happen to them, and they threw everything they had at trying to stop it. They built things in orbit. They modified their atmosphere. They did things we haven't even figured out how to do yet, and it wasn't enough. A civilization that was potentially more advanced than us, that had more time to prepare than we might ever have, wiped out by something they couldn't escape. And then I started thinking about us, about Earth, about how confident we are that we understand our sun, our solar system, our place in the universe. How sure we are that we've identified all the threats, calculated all the risks, prepared for all the contingencies. And I wondered, what if we're wrong? What if there's something out there we haven't found yet? Something we won't find until it's too late? What if Echo isn't a tragedy we're observing from a safe distance? What if it's a preview of our own future? We worked on the report for 2 weeks. Every detail, every data point, every analysis and cross-reference and verification, we documented all of it. David wanted the report to be bulletproof. He knew that what we were claiming would be met with skepticism, possibly even ridicule. We were saying that we had found evidence of an extraterrestrial civilization, not just life, civilization. That's the kind of claim that ends careers if you can't back it up, so we backed it up. We included every piece of raw data, every algorithm we had used, every step of our reasoning laid out in excruciating detail. The final document was over 300 pages long, with appendices that stretched into the thousands. I remember the night we finished it. We gathered in the conference room, exhausted but exhilarated, passing around a bottle of champagne that Jennifer had smuggled in. We knew we had done something historic. We knew we were about to change the world. David raised his glass and said, "To Echo, and to whatever comes next." We all drank. We had no idea what was actually coming next. The report went up the chain on a Monday morning. David hand-delivered it to someone. I never found out who, and came back looking cautiously optimistic. He told us it would probably take a few days for the higher-ups to review everything, maybe a week or two before we heard anything official. We should use the time to rest, he said. We had earned it. So I went home. I slept for 14 hours straight, the first real sleep I had gotten in months. I spent time with Sarah, pretending everything was normal, counting down the days until the announcement that would change everything. I imagined press conferences, interviews, my face on the cover of scientific journals. I imagined being part of the team that proved humanity wasn't alone. I was so naive, so incredibly, pathetically naive. Because when David finally called me back to the facility 3 days later, it wasn't to celebrate. It was to tell me that the project was being shut down. I thought he was joking at first. I actually laughed. But David's face was gray, his eyes hollow, and I realized he hadn't slept since I last saw him. He led me to the conference room where the rest of the team was already gathered, and he told us what had happened. The report had been received. It had been reviewed, and the decision had been made at a level far above David's clearance, that the findings were to be classified at the highest level and the project was to be terminated immediately. No explanation, no discussion, no appeals. Just a directive handed down from somewhere in the shadows, telling us that everything we had worked on for the past 2 years no longer existed. The data was being transferred to a secure server that none of us would have access to. Our workstations were being wiped. The facility itself was being repurposed for a different project. We had 1 week to wrap up our affairs, sign new non-disclosure agreements, and move on with our lives as if Echo had never existed. The NDAs were brutal. I had signed confidentiality agreements before, everyone in this field does, but these were different. These weren't about protecting proprietary research or classified methodologies. These were about erasing the past. We were forbidden from discussing any aspect of the project with anyone, ever, for the rest of our lives. We were forbidden from publishing any papers, giving any talks, or even writing in private journals about what we had discovered. We were forbidden from contacting each other outside of official channels. The penalties for violation were severe: criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and phrases like national security implications that carried unspoken threats. I signed. We all signed. What choice did we have? They had us. They had always had us. From the moment we walked into that facility, we had been operating under their rules, and now they were reminding us exactly who was in charge. The champagne celebration felt like a lifetime ago. A dream I had once had about a world where truth mattered more than power. The team scattered after that. David took a position at a university in Arizona teaching undergraduate astronomy. Jennifer went to work for a private aerospace company and stopped responding to my emails after a few months. Michael just vanished. One day he was there, the next day his desk was empty, and no one would tell me where he had gone. I heard rumors later that he had tried to leak something, a fragment of data, a piece of the puzzle, and that the response had been swift and thorough. I don't know if those rumors were true. I don't want to know. Rodriguez, the technician who had discovered the stellar cycle, retired early and moved to Costa Rica. I ran into him once, years later, at an airport. He pretended not to recognize me. Maybe he actually didn't, or maybe he was just smarter than me, more willing to let the past stay buried. Either way, within 6 months of the shutdown, it was like the project had never existed. Like Echo had never existed. Like all those months of work and wonder and terror had been nothing but a shared hallucination. I've spent years trying to understand why. Why would they bury something this important? Why would anyone look at proof of extraterrestrial civilization, proof that we're not alone in the universe, and decide that humanity didn't deserve to know? At first, I thought it was about control. Governments like secrets. They like being the only ones with access to certain information because information is power. But that didn't fully explain it. This wasn't a military technology or a diplomatic strategy. This was fundamental knowledge about the nature of the cosmos. What did they gain by hiding it? And then I started thinking about the implications. Not the scientific implications. Those were obvious. The political implications. The economic implications. The psychological implications. We had found a civilization that had been destroyed by something they couldn't prevent. Something built into the very star they orbited. What does that mean for the narrative of progress? For the billions of dollars invested in space exploration, in the dream of humanity spreading across the galaxy? If even advanced civilizations can be wiped out by forces beyond their control, what's the point? Why bother reaching for the stars if the stars themselves might kill us? But there's another possibility, one that I've never been able to shake, no matter how much I want to. What if they already knew? What if Echo wasn't the first discovery like this? What if somewhere in the classified archives, there are other reports, other findings, other planets with the same story, civilizations that rose and fell, destroyed by cosmic forces they couldn't escape? What if the people who shut us down did so not because they were surprised by what we found, but because they were afraid we had found too much? Afraid that if enough pieces came together, someone might start asking questions about our own sun, our own solar system, our own future? I have no evidence for this. It's just a feeling. A paranoia that has grown inside me over the years, fed by silence and secrecy and the look in David's eyes when he told us the project was over. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying awake staring at the ceiling, I wonder. I wonder what else they know. I wonder what else they're hiding. And I wonder if the reason they buried Echo is because the truth about our universe is even more terrifying than anything we discovered on that distant, dead world. This is the part that haunts me. They found the most important discovery in human history. Proof that we're not alone. Proof that other intelligences have existed, have built, have struggled against the indifferent forces of the cosmos just like we do. And they buried it. They took that knowledge, that revelation, that answer to the question humanity has been asking since we first looked up at the stars, and they made it disappear. Not because it was fake. The data was real. The analysis was sound. Everything Nathan and his team found has held up to every test. They buried it because it was too real, because the truth wasn't inspiring. It wasn't a story about humanity's glorious future among the stars. It was a warning, a reminder that the universe doesn't care about our dreams or our ambitions, that civilizations can rise and fall and leave nothing behind but fading echoes. And maybe, just maybe, they buried it because they knew something we don't, something about what's waiting for us out there, or what might already be waiting for us here. It's been almost 10 years since the project was shut down. 10 years of silence. 10 years of carrying this weight around, feeling it pressed down on me every single day. I left the field not long after the shutdown. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't sit in rooms with people talking about exoplanet surveys and biosignature detection, knowing what I knew and not being able to say a word. I work in the private sector now, doing data analysis for a tech company. It pays well. It's boring. It's safe. I have a new life, a new routine, a new version of myself that goes to work and comes home and pretends that everything is normal. But it's not normal. It will never be normal again, because every time I look up at the night sky, I see Echo. I see that beautiful blue world with its oceans and its continents and its fading signs of a civilization that tried so hard to survive. And I think about the people who live there, the people who looked up at their own sky and wondered if they were alone. The people who built and dreamed and loved and feared, just like us, and then were erased, like they had never existed at all. I've thought about going public many times over the years, writing a book, contacting journalists, posting everything I remember online and letting the chips fall where they may. But I never did, partly because I was afraid of the consequences, afraid of what they might do to me if I broke the NDA, but mostly because I wasn't sure it would matter. Who would believe me? I have no physical evidence. The data is locked away somewhere I'll never be able to access. All I have is my memory, my testimony, my word against the most powerful institutions in the world. I would be dismissed as a crank, a conspiracy theorist, another delusional former government employee claiming to have seen something extraordinary. The story would be buried again, just like before, and nothing would change. So I stayed silent. I kept my head down. I told myself that someday, somehow, the truth would come out on its own, that I didn't have to be the one to reveal it, that my silence was the smart choice, the safe choice, the only rational choice. But lately, something has changed. Maybe it's getting older. Maybe it's watching the world tear itself apart over things that seem so small compared to what I know. Maybe it's the dreams. I still have dreams about Echo, about that conference room, about the look on David's face when he told us it was over. Whatever the reason, I've realized that silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice. Every day I don't speak is a day I'm complicit in the cover-up, a day I'm helping them keep this secret, a day I'm denying humanity the knowledge that we're not alone in the universe and the warning that comes with that knowledge. Because that's what Echo really is. Not just proof of extraterrestrial civilization, a warning. A reminder that intelligence doesn't guarantee survival, that you can do everything right, build everything you need, prepare for everything you can imagine, and still be destroyed by something you can't control. The universe isn't cruel. It's worse than that. It's indifferent, and we need to know that. We deserve to know that. Even if the truth is terrifying, it's still the truth. I'm not doing this for fame or money or revenge. I don't have an agenda beyond wanting people to understand what we found and what it means. I've tried to be as accurate as possible in everything I've told you, but I want to be clear about the limitations. My memory isn't perfect. It's been almost a decade, and details fade, get mixed up, reconstructed by a brain that's trying to make sense of something that never made sense. Some of the technical specifics might be slightly off. Some of the conversations I've recounted might not be exactly as they happened, but the core of the story, the discovery, the analysis, the shutdown, the silencing, all of that is true. I was there. I saw the data. I watched as everything we had worked for was taken away and locked in a vault somewhere. And I've spent every day since then wondering if I should have fought harder, spoken sooner, done something, anything, to prevent the truth from being buried. This is me finally doing something. This is me saying, we found Echo, and they don't want you to know about it. Make of that what you will. I've been doing this channel for years now. I've covered dozens of stories, military encounters, classified programs, unexplained phenomena. Some of them were compelling. Some of them were probably exaggerated or misremembered. A few, I suspect, were outright fabrications. That's the nature of this field. You have to sift through a lot of noise to find the signal. But Nathan's story is different. I've spent months going through everything he shared with me, checking every detail I could check, consulting with experts in astrophysics and planetary science and government classification procedures. And here's what I can tell you. The technical details are accurate. The spectroscopic analysis he describes, the methods for detecting biosignatures, the way stellar activity cycles work, all of it checks out. The timeline aligns with what we know about classified government programs and their private contractors. The pattern of shutdown and silencing matches what other whistleblowers have described when they've stumbled onto information that powerful people wanted buried. Does that prove his story is true? No, nothing can prove that short of the actual data, which none of us will ever see. But here's what I keep coming back to. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that everything Nathan told us is accurate. That somewhere out there, 42 light years away, there really is a planet called Echo, a planet that was once home to a civilization not so different from ours. A civilization that developed technology, altered their atmosphere, looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone, and then was destroyed by something they couldn't prevent, something built into the very star that gave them life. What does that mean for us? What does it mean to know that intelligence, achievement, progress, none of it guarantees survival? That the universe has timers built into it, clocks ticking down toward events that can erase everything a species has ever built? If we knew that for certain, if we had proof that there was a cosmic deadline hanging over our heads, would it change how we live? Would we stop fighting over borders and resources and ideology? Would we come together, finally, to face the only enemy that really matters? Or would we do what we always do, deny, distract, and pretend that tomorrow is guaranteed? I don't have answers to those questions. I'm not sure anyone does, but I think they're worth asking. I think they're worth sitting with, even if they're uncomfortable. Because whether or not Nathan's story is true, the underlying reality remains: we are a small species on a small planet orbiting an average star in an ordinary galaxy. We have existed for the blink of an eye in cosmic terms, and we have no guarantee that we'll exist for much longer. That's not pessimism, that's just the truth. The universe doesn't owe us anything. It doesn't care about our dreams or our fears or our desperate hope that we matter. If we want to survive, really survive, not just for another century, but for another million years, we have to earn it. We have to be smarter, more careful, more humble than we've ever been before. And we have to start by acknowledging that there are things out there we don't understand, things that might be more dangerous than we ever imagined, things that someone, somewhere, might be hiding from us for reasons we can only guess at. Nathan asked me to end this video with a message. He wanted me to tell you that he's not looking for followers or believers or people to validate his experience. He just wanted the story out there. He wanted someone, anyone, to hear what he's been carrying alone for almost a decade. And he wanted to leave you with a question, not an answer, a question. He said, if you knew that humanity had a deadline, not tomorrow, not next year, but someday, inevitably, would you live differently? Would you treat people differently? Would you look at the stars and feel wonder, or would you feel fear? I don't know how to answer that. I'm still figuring it out myself, but I think the question matters. I think asking it, really sitting with it, changes something inside you. It reminds you that time is precious, that nothing is permanent, that the universe is vast and ancient and full of mysteries we're only beginning to glimpse. And that maybe, just maybe, the greatest discovery we can make is not out there among the stars, but in how we choose to live while we're here. I don't know if everything in this story is true. I may never know, but I know this. There are things out there we're not being told, programs we don't know about, Discoveries that have been classified and buried and forgotten by everyone except the people who made them. And maybe, just maybe, there's a reason for that. Maybe the truth is too dangerous, too destabilizing, too terrifying for ordinary people to handle. Or maybe that's just what they want us to believe. Maybe we're stronger than they think. Maybe we can handle the truth, whatever it is. The question is, do we have the right to know anyway? Do we have the right to decide for ourselves what we can and can't handle? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if Nathan's story changed how you think about our place in the universe. Tell me what you would do if you found out tomorrow that everything he said was true. And if this story made you think, even for a second, about what's out there, about what we might not know, about what it means to be human in a universe that doesn't care if we survive, subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because this is just the beginning. There are more stories out there, more people who have seen things they weren't supposed to see, more truths that someone somewhere is trying to keep hidden. And I'm going to keep finding them. I'll see you in the next one.